When you think of Manchester United, there are a few things that jump to the top of your head. Its illustrious history, its trophy cabinet, its stadium, and there's also this one other thing, its talent pipeline. We've named an academy graduate in every single one of our matchday squads since October 1937. Over 4,000 games and 85 years. It's basically ingrained into our DNA and our culture at this point. Some of our most successful sides are littered with academy graduates. From the Busby Babes to Fergie's Fletchling to everything in between, the club's never had a shortage of talent through its pipeline. And we are onto another set of golden generation. Hang on a minute. We said the same thing about the last batch, and the batch before that, and the one before that. Hang on a minute. Something's not right here. Hello everyone, my name is Samuel. Welcome back to the channel. And what the fuck is an earpiece doing in my ear? Anywho, again, it's been a while since an upload. Well, basically my uni course has started and assignments are piling up. And this is like the gap, the 2 to 3 day gap between a set of assignments and another set of tests and assignments. And so we're filming this. I have nothing much to say, so let's get on with the video. If you like this type of content, do give it a like, click subscribe, turn on the post notifications so that you don't miss a future upload, and let's get right into it. For a club whose whole identity is based around youth development, it's a bit mad to think that there's only one regular starter in the entire 11 at the moment. It should be 2, by the way. The keeper on loan at Forest should definitely be starting out of our current number 1, and I fucking dare you to say otherwise. And another who's basically a squad player and 1 to 2 youngsters in and around the first team. And at the best of times, there were about 4 to 5 in the 11. Even though there were question marks about whether some of them should be in the 11 in the first place. So what I want to do in this video is take a look back at the foregone generations. Or is it begone? I'm not exactly sure which one it is. And assess the youngsters and how they developed, and at the end compare with some of the best academies in the world during that time frame. So yeah, without further ado, let's get right into it. So the first batch of youngsters we want to talk about was the one from 2011, and this set of youngsters was the first one to receive this amount of hype since the class of 92, and rightly so. After Youth Cup winners, they were expected to be the future spine of Manchester United, and we did get a couple of good players out of it. Paul Pogba, Jesse Lingard, both played over 230 games for the club, bagging themselves a few trophies in the process, even though the former had to come back for 90 million euros. We don't really talk about that here, let's just gloss over it. Both even had relatively good national careers. Paul Pogba made over 90 appearances for France, winning a World Cup. So relatively good is a bit of an understatement. Jesse Lingard made over 30 appearances for England and a regular starter in the 2018 World Cup where they made the semi-finals. Other than that, there were a few players who also made it down in the English pyramid. For example, Sam Johnstone, who was a keeper in the team, went a few divisions low in the English pyramid and had to build his career back up, but eventually he found his home as a regular starter at Villa in the Championship and then in West Brom before being promoted to the Premier League, and he was one of their better players in a rather dull season and got himself a few England caps in the process. Michael Keane moved to Burnley and then to Everton, where he's had a relatively stop-start career, but even then bagged himself double-digit caps for England, and at one point it was linked to a move back to Manchester United before we eventually signed Victor Lindelof back in 2017. Other than that, there were also a few youngsters who didn't live up to the potential that they showed. The obvious one being Ravel Morrison. He was tipped for things greater than both Pogba and Lingard, so Alex viewed him as the most naturally gifted footballer to come out of Carrington, yet it never really came to anything. His off-field issues combined with his inability to adapt to the lifestyle costed him his United career. You could even go as saying costed a successful career in football, because his whole career is just a short-term deal at different clubs all across Europe, until he eventually found a home with his former senior teammate, now manager, Wayne Rooney, first at Derby County and now at DC United. 2 players who made it at United and 2 players who were in and around the English top flight. you would say that's a pretty successful batch, and you take those. And it's also key to point out that by this time Sir Alex Ferguson was flirting with retirement, so his focus on youth wasn't as clear as before. So it's not a bad argument to suggest that with proper nurturing, a few more of these players would have made the step up and became a regular at Manchester United. This pathway to the first team was becoming a bit clouded and deteriorated, and he was trying to get some short-term results. But if this pathway to the first team was this cloudy back then, it wasn't gonna get any clearer throughout this video, trust me. David Moyes' tenure was a bit hard to judge because it was so short. So the academy was a bit of a mishmash between the batch under Sir Alex, who were neither here nor there, and a few youngsters who were making up the youth categories. But even then, one player really stood out.
Is Januzaj! What a volley!
In such an underwhelming season, he stood out like a sore thumb. When he turned the game on its head against Sunderland, the war stopped and took notice. We had club legends likening him to a certain Cristiano Ronaldo. We even had 5 nationalities fighting for his representation at one point, with England, Belgium, Kosovo, Turkey, Albania, all fighting so that he could represent their country. This was the OG World War III. It wasn't supposed to end like this. And yet it did. And scripting this video, I looked back and tried to find possible people I could point my finger to. And there was one person whom I really struggled to point a finger at. And that was Januzaj himself. Because as a 19-year-old who just had his breakthrough season, you're looking at Louis van Gaal and Jose Mourinho coming in next. Arguably 2 of the worst managers possible when it comes to managing exciting young talent. It started off with Louis van Gaal phasing him out in his first season, loaning him out to Dortmund in his second, before being completely exiled by Jose Mourinho. A tragic end to a promising career, one which never really recovered. And again, it falls under the category of another exciting young talent mismanaged by the people up top. $60. No, that's not the amount of times Louis van Gaal has tried to sabotage us since we sacked him. Although I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. But in this context, it's the amount of teenagers Louis van Gaal has given debuts to. And mostly due to us having the worst medical team possible. Because no joke, there were points in that tenure where we could make a whole starting 11 from our injured list, which usually, in case you didn't know, is not a good sign. A few of the players that he gave debuts to were in this result over here. I'm not gonna mention it, it's just a figment of my imagination, it doesn't exist. There were also players like Paddy McNair and Cameron Borthwick-Jackson, players who weren't really good enough but were only playing due to the lack of bodies in their respective positions. But there were a few players who actually had the talent but never really made it due to circumstances. Timothy Fosu-Mensah, for example, showed so much promise when he first broke through, but unfortunately a couple of unsuccessful loan spells under Jose Mourinho coupled with multiple ACL injuries meant he was a shadow of his former self and never really lived up to the potential that he showed before being shipped off to Bayer Leverkusen, where, unfortunately enough, he suffered another ACL injury, which is just tragic, man. It just killed off a career before he even started. Guillermo Varela was another one who showed promise but never really made it at United, but he's one of the few cases where he actually had a relatively successful career outside of United, because he put up regular starting gigs at clubs like Copenhagen and Dinamo Moscow, and some South American giants like Peñarol and Flamengo. And he was even part of the Uruguay setup for both the 2018 and the 2022 World Cup. So that's a pretty good CV outside of Manchester United. But back to the point, as you can see from the sheer amount of talent that Louis van Gaal has given debuts to, you would think that he's actually caring about pathway to the first team. It really wasn't. He's just playing them because our seniors had fucking Weetabix for legs. But as the saying goes, like, if you throw mud at a wall long enough, some of them will stick. I don't know if that's an actual saying or not, I just heard it on Football Manager at one point. But assuming that's true, one of these talents has to be good enough. And one was.
Clever movement so far from Manchester United, and there he is again! Marcus Rashford at the double!
An injury to Anthony Martial. Of f***ing course it is an injury to Anthony Martial. When is it not an injury to Anthony Martial? Gave him his debut against Michelin in a Europa League game, and the rest, as they say, is history. Over 350 appearances, 120 goals, over 60 assists for the club, 50 appearances and 15 goals for England, and a regular starter in Jose Mourinho's side at times, but especially under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and Erik ten Hag. You could say he was the best product the club has produced during this time frame. Jose Mourinho came in with a reputation of not trusting youth, and lo and behold, he more than lived up to it. Apart from one game in 2017 where we played a bunch of kids. Remember Josh Harrop? Yeah, that game. Apart from one iconic photo, there wasn't anybody from that game who made it at United. Even talents from the previous regime like Martial and Rashford weren't really trusted. He even had 16-year-old Angel Gomez crying on the phone to his dad after a rant at the dinner table by Mourinho. Such was his reputation. Either you're good enough technically, physically, mentally already, or you might as well go change sports. So it's no wonder nobody made it under Mourinho. Except one. Scott McTominay found its way into Mourinho's midfield despite being a striker in the academy. And given the fact that he's still playing midfield under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and now under Ten Hag, and the fact that he's gathered up over 200 appearances with the club, you could say he's had a pretty successful United career. But even then, one talent in 3 years, that's not good. But it's Jose Mourinho. The bar was in hell. So it's a bit of a surprise that even one person made it through. So remember how I said the pathway between the academy and the first team was practically Yeah, under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was the first time that the club took any form of measure to make amends, thanks to the work of himself, John Murtagh, Darren Fletcher, Neil Wood and Nicky Butt. The recruitment drive between 2019 and 2021 made sure that a lot of highly talented youngsters were brought through the door for the United under-18s, where they will be developed further, along with a already highly talented set of youngsters there, the likes of Alejandro Garnacho, Alvaro Fernandez, Hannibal, Ahmad, Facu Pelestri, Isak Hansen, just to name a few players who came in through the door during those 2 years. But even then, it took a couple of years for everything to settle down, which means that a lot of the players who were inherited from Jose Mourinho's last season had to be sacrificed. For example, Angel Gomez refused to sign a new contract and had to be let go on a free. Axel Tuanzebe had a really good loan spell at Aston Villa, but came back and eventually stagnated due to lack of game time and injuries. Ethan Laird showed so much promise as a modern-day fullback, one who can go both ways, but a bunch of unsuccessful loan spells as well as injuries basically stagnated any form of development he had. Andreas Pereira finally got his opportunity, one of the most technically gifted midfielders to come off the academy under Louis van Gaal and Jose Mourinho, but he wasn't cut out for United and eventually had to be let go to initially Brazil and now Fulham. Brendan Williams actually made it with United, made his debut at 19, even displaced Luke Shaw at one point. But a few bad performances and we basically signed a fake Brazilian, stunted his development, and now he's stuck with an injury. That's partially the club's fault. But that didn't mean everybody failed. Dean Henderson, after a few good loan spells at Sheffield United, finally made his debut in the 2020-2021 season, even displacing David De Gea for the number 1 spot at a few points, and should have been the number 1 in the 2021-22 season if any of our managers had any form of cojones. James Garner, after an unsuccessful loan spell at Watford, went to Nottingham Forest, became a crowd favourite, should have made it with the club, but had to be sacrificed due to club finances. But the biggest talent of them all, the one who was a cut above the rest and was a regular starter at points, was none other than Mason Greenwood. But we found out he's a woman beater, so it doesn't really count at all. Now is the point where I would make a segment for Ralf Rangnick, but I don't want to because number one, I have a personal grudge against him, and number two, there's only one person I want to talk about, Anthony Elanga. And again, there's really not much to talk about. He was rushed into the first team, he started off well, but eventually stagnated due to not having proper growth, and now he's a fringe player under Erik ten Hag. He needs a few loan spells, hopefully we can give him at the start of the next season. But yeah, that's really about it for Ralf Rangnick. At the end of the day, producing 6 academy talents across 11 years isn't a bad return compared to some of the most well-known clubs in world football. La Masia, barring the recent boom, have only produced Sergio Roberto as a regular. Real Madrid have Dani Carvajal, Bayern have Alaba, PSG are just selling off all their talent so they have none. Even in England, City have Foden, Chelsea have Mount and James, Arsenal have Saka and Nketiah, Spurs have Kane, Liverpool have Alexander-Arnold. Oh yeah, there's something I want to point out, and I only noticed it after I finished recording everything, so you can see my voice is half gone. Is that it's a bit hard to keep track of Chelsea, so I only mentioned Mount and James, but there's the likes of Tammy Abraham, Conor Gallagher. So Chelsea are the one exception where they're actually producing talent quite regularly. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Doesn't really change my point though, but it's worth pointing out before somebody calls out in the comments, I guess. Anyways, back to Pass Me. So it's not like the academies are booming talent and keeping them. So 6 players as regular starters across 11 years, it's a pretty decent return, given the fact that the pathway from the academy to the first team has been practically deteriorated for most of the time. And that's where the majority of the problem lies, the pathway. I get it, the jump from the under-23s to the first team is a big jump, and even though you will be the most talented player in the under-23s, there's still a really good chance that you won't make it in the first team. It's natural, because you have to be ready both physically, psychologically, and technically. It's not easy, but it's your job as a manager, loan manager, head of youth development, youth staff, whatever, to put these youngsters in the best possible position for them to have the development curve go this way and not this way. Finding perfect loans for them, keeping track of them, giving them feedback when necessary, bringing them back into the setup only when they're ready. That's the job of the people at hand, because there's really no point having an academy for our specific club, because we're not based on selling, even though that's an area we should improve on, because the likes of City, Chelsea and PSG have made quite a lot of money selling off their academy graduates, even though Chelsea and PSG are probably better off just keeping them. We're not based on selling players, we're based on bringing back players to fit within our system. So it's imperative that we get these developments right. Otherwise, there's really no point having an academy. The question shouldn't be, is the Manchester United academy good? The question should be, does Manchester United have the required staff who are qualified enough to handle the development of its academy's graduates so that they can make it in the first team? And the answer for most of those 11 years has been no, not even close. But given the fact that we have a setup now prepared by Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, John Murtough, Erik ten Hag and co, and there is a plethora of young talent waiting in the under-21s and in the under-18s, this will be a litmus test over the next few years to see whether we've actually changed and are actually getting these talents into the first team. And breathe. That was a long video. In the last part, I completely went off script because my script was completely different to what I actually said, and my throat is hurting. It's 2:30 a.m. I should probably go sleep. But anywho, thank you all for watching, and this video idea came quite late because I didn't really know what I want to make, and this was actually a bit of a thing because I think there were a lot of people bashing on the United Academy and saying we overhype stars. So yeah, that's one thing I kind of want to get it out of the way, and I did really enjoy making this video. I think this is probably a better video than the other two, so yeah, I would really appreciate it if you give it a like, click subscribe, turn on the post notifications, all that good stuff. And yeah, until I have a break again, which is probably a couple weeks from now, I'll see you all again then. Until then, take care of yourselves, and see ya.